Great. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm happy to be here with Eric to discuss how to wrestle your observability data demons and win. This is actually a really exciting webinar for me. I've been wanting to do this for a while. I think this is one of the unique capabilities of our platform that we'll discuss. But first, let's talk about the agenda here. So, wrestling with data demons. We're going to talk about why cloud native environments are making an already growing data problem worse. And then we'll jump into what do you actually need for observability? Why are open standards, scale, and control over data shaping a top priority? And then we'll jump into how do you manage this data growth? And we'll talk about some ways that you can do that, and also look at the Chronosphere's unique control plane that allows you to do that in a very effective way. And then lastly, we'll walk through a couple of our customer case studies and discuss how they're using the platform to do this. It's with abnormal security and DoorDash. So let's jump right in. Wrestling with data demons. First of all, cloud native observability data is growing at a very, very alarming pace. It's a business critical problem that will have far-reaching consequences for organizations if they don't solve it. And it's actually accelerating, and companies are concerned. As you can see here, 71% of companies in a recent survey have said that they're concerned with this issue. And cloud made the problem worse, but cloud native, which there's a difference there, is actually making it exponentially worse. And the reason that's happening is because here's an example on this slide of how two similar size scale environments. One is VM-based and the other one's cloud native. So on the cloud native side, there's more to monitor. On the VM side, it's a one-to-one relationship. On the cloud native side, it's a many-to-many relationship. This ephemeral infrastructure, it comes and goes. There's greater interdependencies. So you have higher cardinality, monitoring data, and a greater need to correlate and connect infrastructure to applications and to business metrics. Again, this is the same scale environment, and it will result in a much higher monitoring bill just at this same scale. Eric, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is what we've been seeing over the years, and it's not that people are just now discovering cloud native and the scale that's happening. I think what they're being surprised by is the amount of scale that's involved, and that scale is translating through to the data that's being generated from what you're observing from your applications and your services in these kind of environments. It's a completely different world.
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and get to the next slide, and we can start talking about what we're dealing with here. So as you saw there, a lot of these companies are realizing that they're watching the level of their production and what they're doing with customers and their business. The amount of data that's being generated there is being surpassed by their observability data. So any of the monitoring stuff you're looking at is generating so much stuff back out of these scaled up environments that it's becoming incredibly shocking to the organizations. And this quote here is from an article from our CEO, and it's a lot of stuff we see happening at quite a few of the customers and people we end up talking to out in the wild. It's becoming a remarkably common situation. And let's be honest, people don't mind paying the money if you're getting higher levels of availability, or if you're getting happier customers, or if you're able to remediate your problems faster or generate more revenue. Then nobody's going to talk about this. But that's not the correlation between more paying and better results, and that's a little bit of the problem here. And on the next slide, I have a great example of that. Dug up just somebody that had done, and the speaker notes include the link to the article. Somebody that did a very simple hello world, 4-node Kubernetes, in the cloud native world, with simple tracing, end user metrics, had a web-based app on the front end, and just generated pings to this app like a user was visiting a website. Did the logs, metrics, containers, nodes, just the standard stuff. And they looked at 30 days worth of data, and you ended up with almost a half a terabyte for just one app on a 4-node cluster for 30 days. Now, how many people are running one app in the cloud when they're doing this stuff at scale? And another thing you have to think about is that on average, companies are having to store this for whatever reason, the data that they have for at least 13 months. if that's your average storage date, think about test environments, think about educational environments in large organizations where maybe you spin up an environment and do a lab and some training for a week and then bring it back down. Do you really need to keep that stuff that long? Do you want to store all this data and pay for that storage? And these are the kind of things that nobody was really considering or nobody owned, which brings us to the next slide. A really interesting quote, I thought. You don't see a lot of quotes that come down the pipeline from the various analysts that are talking about 80%. It's usually a little bit more, below half when it starts getting interesting. But they're saying by next year, 80% of the organizations will be establishing an actual role for ownership of the costs around this kind of thing in an organization. And the thing is, you have examples of at least I've seen customers where engineers have to make decisions at a certain point in time of what they're going to use, and they're using a certain cloud provider, and they click on a load balancer they want to use, and that turns out to generate quite a bit of problems in the org because it doesn't scale enough to put enough metrics data behind it, and so they have to do a load balancing of the load balancers, and it just spirals the cost. And there's no real ownership of that often in larger organizations. It's kind of reacting to the problem, trying to fix it without real oversight. And this FinOps role that they're talking about is something that's going to bring try to bring that kind of value under control. Again, it's not that they don't want to pay for it. It's not that you don't like that you're having this scaling in costs. It's just it's not resulting in the better outcomes, which is the problem. And the next one, or anything you want to add there, Scott?
No, I think you're right. It's really interesting to see that kind of quick growth of that type of, a FinOps kind of organization. Yeah, it is interesting. So let's talk about, in this new world of cloud native, what are the needs that for observability?
Right. So what you see here is something we've taken a spin-off on what's called the Maslow pyramid. He talks about the hierarchy of needs that has to do with like the basic things for survival, like food, clothing, job security, friendship, self-esteem, and self-actualization. We translated this into one of our engineers was talking about this, I believe, is where it comes from, but the observability hierarchy of needs. And what you see here is that the bottom level, the basic need is, of course, data, right? You have to be able to collect and access the data that you're trying to use to see that things are going okay. From that data, you need to be able to generate alerts and dashboards. And then you have to be able to scale, and the ultimate dream is to have control over that, to be able to control the scale, control the data, control the alerts, control the dashboards in such a way that you're able to reduce costs and achieve that balance where what you're paying for is delivering the results you want, right? That's basically the bottom line here. So we move on to the next one. You'll see that we start digging into the architecture here of what it takes to do that. And if you look at the first three needs, the data, alerts, and dashboards, you can see here at the top level, what you really want to do is be able to ingest and receive all these things through an open standard where possible. And every architect will tell you that's the first thing they're looking for. You want to have the ability to replace a component or replace a tool or replace an application by using something that communicates in the same way as a standard across the industry. Where it's not always a standard, before it becomes a standard, usually there's a sort of a consensus or an unofficial standard, right? That everybody's choosing to go down this path or to use this particular protocol. That's where you see here, you're looking for standard ingestion for your metrics, for your dashboards, for your query languages, alerts, and for traces. When you get those in, then you're able to ingest those. You're able to develop alerting mechanisms around that, or have some kind of standard component that is an alerts manager. Being able to visualize that stuff through standard dashboards, and being able to do something with your metrics and your tracing to develop some kind of deep ability to dig down into those. That's the dream, right? So on to the next one. And then we reach that next level, we talk about scale, right? So at the scale level, you want to have the ability to have a backend that has been proven across multiple platforms. So there's not just one cloud provider out there, or one data center, or one whatever you're using. You want to be able to use your observability across all these platforms. and in a reliable, scalable way. And even across multiple regions, with having multiple backups in case something goes wrong. You want data consistency across all that. That gets tricky when you start doing that stuff yourself and trying to build it up out of just open source projects. On to the next one, and we'll look at the actual dream here, and we get to the control part, right? So a control part is a control plane or something that allows you to gain control over your data, and preferably real time. So getting a look at like cost accounting and quotas, being able to set things so that teams or areas of your organization don't run through a cloud bill that you don't really want to pay for some reason. It could be as simple as somebody deploying an app with an exponential increase in your cardinality and your metrics. That stuff is going to just start generating data like crazy, which you didn't expect. If you have the ability to set some kind of quotas, hey, then you can stop that, or at least send warnings before it blows through the roof, right? Being able to, the unique ability to dive into those issues with metrics and tracing, introspection, being able to set custom retention and resolution policies, and being able to tweak that as it's coming in live, right? So there's some stuff you may not need to create the same dashboard to have the same information. You want to be able to fine tune that and get your view without spending so much money on retaining so much of your metrics. And then there's the ability for some kind of a fine-grained access management, right, about who does what and where. And with that, I would like to pass it back to you, I believe, and we will move on to the managing.
Yeah, one other point here is, we're talking a lot about cost, right? But there's also a reliability component to this, right? We're going to see many of our customers have had this issue where, the amount of data, you talk about high cardinality. High cardinality is really dependent on the organization, right? So a lot of times this cardinality can overwhelm a monitoring system, especially in a very large scale cloud native environment. So, we're talking a lot about cost today. You also got to think about the reliability aspect of this and keeping the monitoring system stable enough to actually be able to use it when there is a problem, and trying to suppress that unexpected growth. Because, as a team as you break these organizations into smaller teams that are doing independent updates to an application and to an environment, a cardinality spike can happen very easily by someone just adding a simple tag, right?
Yeah. One of the things also that you got to think about is that spike and stuff could just completely degrade the speed at which your dashboards are loading. So if you start adding a whole bunch more stuff, it's got to search through. You start seeing a slowing down of everything, which doesn't really help you figure out what's going on in some cases, right?
Right. All right. Yeah. So as we think about managing this data growth, we got to start thinking about what are the different options that you actually have, and what have we seen customers try to do in the past. And so these things so you're looking at, there's temporary things you can do, and then there's like real fixes. And so if we want to look at some of these, the first one is you can spend more money, right? There's always an option. The vendors are happy to take it, but you'd only want to do that if it's actually going to give you better outcomes. And there are times that you will need to increase your spend. There's no doubt. Like, you're not going to stay in the same size monitoring system for all eternity. So that's definitely something to consider. But at the same time, you don't want to do it unless it's actually a real need. If you've got a system that's ingesting data and metrics that you're not using, tags that developers put on their code that aren't being used at all, you should be able to control that and not have to spend the money on it. A lot of times we've seen customers, they just decide to stop collecting so much data. They start monitoring less, and that's not a real ideal situation either, right? So it's just because the expense is getting so high. And a lot of times what they'll do is they'll start to add more tools. I think we've seen the stats out there, 10 tools, 12 tools, 20 tools of monitoring, right? They've got their their big APM platform, say it's an all-in-one solution, but it's too expensive to use across the organization. So they start to look for other cheaper solutions. They got their good stuff that they use, their APM, their top pricey apps on, and they got their stuff that they don't care about as much. They're using open source or lower quality tools. But now you've got all these different solutions others are using data pipelines, right? We're seeing that as a big trend where customers are trying to intercept their data before it gets there, manipulate it, and maybe send it to someplace else for cold storage, logs especially. They're using that a lot for, and then you're paying egress costs and re-ingestion, and you have all these different silos that you're trying to manage. And so, and it just creates a lot of complexity, and you need a lot more resources. And so that's why we think that the best way is to take back control, is to use a solution that provides you with a control plane that actually puts you in the data seat. It actually allows you to shape the data that you're bringing into the platform in real time, and you get to reduce your costs, improve reliability, and without losing the insights you need to effectively run your business. And now Eric's going to walk you through how we help you do that.
And it's also not just with SREs or observability teams. It gives you control to anybody that's in the platform to be able to work on stuff like that. So our mission, we're trying to help customers, and we're taking a different view at this. You hear an awful lot about pillars. Pillars isn't a technology approach. We prefer to do this in phases. Phases is talking about what the use case is. It's talking about the business value, and it's talking about something that the users are going through. And you want to get it. You want your observability platform to be able to know, triage, and understand. Right. These are the three things you got to remember. So the first one is you want to know as quickly as possible when something's going wrong, or something has gone wrong, but preferably before a customer has a really bad experience about it. When you're starting to reach a problem level, you want some kind of indication. That might result immediately in a remediation action that you can do in the system, or you're going to be provided with insights into that data, and through that alert, you'll be provided with a dashboard to be able to start triaging the problem and start digging down into what exactly is going on and why. Whether that's going through different metrics or traces or looking at log stuff. It doesn't really matter how you do that technology-wise. What the most important thing is that you're being led down a path with the least amount of resistance and the least amount of clicks to get you to the triage point where you can remediate. So if you haven't already remediated in the first phase, you definitely want to do it in the second. And that lets you breathe easy because you fix the problem, but you then have to figure out, hey, I want to be able to understand deeply what went wrong. And by being led down that path, you're already quite far down there. And being able to expand the knowledge and do that root cause analysis and understand exactly what happens so you can prevent the future cases of this. So a completely different approach. It's much more business focused, much more resolving the problem with phases instead of technology discussions, which means you don't have to keep throwing a tool at it, right? You want to encompass this entire process inside the platform you're trying to use for your observability. To the next one there. In that case, this awareness, it requires real-time metrics, right? And here you see an example of a dashboard we have that is broken out into the groups, in this case by teams. It generates these metrics through Chronosphere platform automatically. So this is all coming in, and it provides out-of-the-box dashboards that can visualize this kind of usage data. You can do it in a number of different ways. We've chosen as an example dashboard here, the case by teams. So you see team A, B, C, D, and what they're doing. But you can, of course, use these metrics to create any kind of view you like across teams or services or groups or use cases or whatever you think is interesting and required for your business to run smoothly, and give you a real-time view of what's going on in your platforms and in your infrastructure, your applications, your services, whatever it might be. And additionally, because these are standard metrics, you can alert on them. So you can set thresholds, right? So we can see that there's individual teams being notified before things get too expensive, before they go too far with their extra cardinality metrics that they added in the last deployment. It spikes through the roof. Have you seen anything like this before, Scott, that you want to mention?
No, I just think that, we're talking here, the control plane, right? And this is really one of the very unique capabilities of our platform. We actually give, the users insight into which teams are using what metrics. You can see what they're actually using. You can see who's responsible for maybe a cardinality spike, as you mentioned. And I think, the next best part is, I'll move on to the next slide. You can talk about this, but this, the profiler and understanding just you can actually, why don't you talk through this? You're probably better at it than I am.
Yeah,
better
so
equipped for it.
well, it's just a screenshot, but it's of the metrics profiler, and what you see here on the left is a view of the high level metrics, not being enough. So this is zooming right down into one of the problems you might find, and you're getting to see about just about every dimension of the metrics, right, that you want to see. And this is a live view, so you'll see this thing move and change as updates come in and new metrics are flowing into the system. And as you dig deeper into that, it allows you to click through and to select and filter out interactively as they're being ingested and as they're processed and stored. And should you have a huge metric spike, which we'll see in a bit here, a second, you can take action on that. So the portion on the right shows you the volume breakdown. You can see how many data points per second are flowing through. You have an average and a current data points per second reading there. Again, this also flows. This is it's just grouped by Prometheus metrics names here. On the left, you see the cardinality analysis of individual metric keys, the labels there, and you see a percentage as they're flowing through there, and how many unique ones it's found on each one. And if you click the next button there, you see that the red circle shows us that there's highlighting this ID here. And for example, we might be investigating a problem here where we have a cardinality spike. And we see here that 50% of this ID, 50% of the ID is coming in, but it's almost 400 unique cardinality points, metric points, right? This is, those unique values are kind of high, and it might be an indicator that we have something excessive going on here. It may not, but I mean, in this case, using it as an example, we're going to kind of float that story. And this can be done right now by anybody that's digging into this. It doesn't have to be a central observability team or the SRE that does this. This allows you to select that ID right there and maybe filter some of that out until you figure out what's going on, right? Or to dig a little deeper into what exactly is being generated and what this ID is coming from. On to the next one. So here you see a little bit of a higher level architecture overview of how you're shaping and reshaping the data on the fly. So we walk through what you just saw and you see the awareness and the insights, but that's not enough, right? Without having the control built into the backplane, having the control plane, giving you the ability to access and deal with the huge amounts of data that's coming back and forth without a lot of handwork. You'll be able to, you don't want to have to go back out and instrument your metrics data and maybe touching your key infrastructure or your application code again. You want to do this on the fly with what's being ingested automatically, and be able to downsample this or to aggregate or to filter or to drop. And Chronosphere gives your engineers the power to reshape that before it's stored. And that's the key right there, right? So when we do talk about cost, cost is storage. Cost is not the ingestion. So we do really like to have insights from the metric profiler that you saw on the previous slide to be able to catch stuff before it gets out of control. In some of the more extreme cases, we've seen customers going into the 90% reduction in data volumes. But typically what we see is around 48%, 50% reduction without doing anything extreme, but just by analysis and looking at what you need to use and losing the cardinality pieces that you really don't need in your metrics data. So it's a pretty cool thing to be able to do, right? And if you go to the next slide there, we'll give you an example of the end results here where you can get a pretty good idea, I think, visually and with the numbers there. So these are screenshots of looking at just the raw transactions that are coming in around a little over 130K on cardinality metrics that are flowing into the system over a 6-hour period. And by doing the right kind of data that's being aggregated or downsampled or dropped or whatever you're doing along the way, you're still generating the exact same graph there on the left that you do on the right with all the raw data points, but you're doing it with a cardinality of 180 instead of 130K. And you also see the little labels there at the bottom where the inspect CPU raw, in this case, you can see the query time to load that table and to load that dashboard is 6.69 seconds versus the 108 milliseconds on the left, which is, you know, a huge indication of dashboard times and performances. And the idea being you're not only just paying for something, but you're getting the response times and the performance and the ability to dissect and triage and understand what's going on for a whole lot less data than what you would be spending over here. So that's kind of the idea here, giving you back the control to filter it down to what you really need.
And one of the new things that we recently announced was the ability for what's called Query Accelerator. So for dashboards, actually, as you were talking there about, you know, the slowness, if something is if dashboard starts to perform slow, we constantly monitor and analyze that. And if we see that, we actually create a pre-aggregated pre-aggregation of the metrics so that we can actually speed up your dashboards automatically, so that you know, all your dashboards can be fast, and you don't have to, you know, if they're shared across the fleet, you can actually, all those will be updated as well. And again, this is done automatically by the platform, and we just announced it last week.
That's a really good point. I forgot to mention the best part about that is, you know, writing these queries is really hard to generate these dashboards and to do these things. And it's any assistance we can get along the way that's automated is really nice. And so you do your best with the query, and then behind the scenes, it's automating, optimizing, and doing better table joins than I probably do, right? That's the idea.
Yeah, the idea is that you write a query, and then, but because of the dynamic and ephemeral nature of these cloud native environments, that query is, you know, that query needs care and feeding, right? You can't just set it and forget it, and it's going to always run, because as the certain number of service instances changes, you know, that's a dynamic type of thing that's happening. And so the Query Accelerator will actually adapt to that and make all your queries, you know, faster. All right, so let's move on to what winning looks like. And so we have a couple customers here we're going to talk about. First, we'll talk about abnormal security, and then we'll talk about DoorDash and how they're using our platform. Abnormal security is an interesting case study. They are, if you're not familiar with them, they offer an AI-based threat detection engine for enterprise email security, and they've been experiencing really significant growth. Their metric growth was actually about 10 to 12 million active metrics, and it was on pace to sort of 50 million. And this was really affecting the availability and reliability of their monitoring solution, and their costs were just out of control. And so they actually went with Chronosphere, and the control plane that we offered, that we just kind of walked through, allowed them to aggregate 98% of their metrics, which resulted in being 10 times more cost effective than alternative SaaS and self-managed options. And it also, you know, you're like, oh, great. Well, they, you know, reduce their costs, but what about their mean time to detection and mean time to resolution? Well, that was actually reduced by about 80% based on their SLOs. So very effective solution for them to be able to really reduce their costs. They were running into a problem where they couldn't even onboard new customers because their metric cardinality was so high, and it was really pushing the limits of their system. And then DoorDash, I'm assuming people know what DoorDash is. For the most part, it's you know, the food delivery, and so they've experienced a massive increase in business and scale and architectural complexity as they've moved from to cloud native microservices. And on top of these sources of observability data growth, they were working hard to add more data to be able to understand customers. They're a very data-driven organization, and so as you're adding tags and stuff, and adding labels, it was actually really creating a massive growth in data for them. And before Chronosphere, it was really impacting the engineers' confidence in the observability tooling, because data was heavily degraded and the monitoring system was very unstable. So using Chronosphere, they've been able to reduce their metric volume by about 37%. And Chronosphere is providing them with 4 nines of reliability while supporting more than 1,300 engineers and 100 million metrics. So pretty significant size, large organization. seeing great benefits from the Chronosphere platform and specifically how the control plane is affecting them. And so in summary here, as we talked about, cloud native environments created data on an order of magnitude greater than their VM-based monolithic counterparts, and it's accelerating an already growing data problem. And the challenge here is that most monitoring or observability vendors can't effectively manage the volume and the unpredictable spikes in this data growth. So you have to spend more, which we talked about, monitor less, or use more tools to manage it, which isn't really an effective solution because, as we talked about, it's very, all those options aren't great options. They're options, but they're not great options. And so, but with Chronosphere, we actually allow you to understand where that growth is coming from, as Eric showed you in the metric profiler. You can decide what you keep, for how long, and at what resolution. So, the metric profiler, as I said, mentions, you can see where did it come from? What's causing that spike? The control plane allows you to reshape that data before it's stored, drop any, drop unused or less important data. You can actually see, is that metric being actually used by anybody? And then, as Eric mentioned, which results in about a 48% reduction on average for the amount of data that people are storing as part of their observability system without losing their ability to remediate issues quickly. And with that, we have some resources here that if you want to dive more into the control plane, there's a great blog out there, a couple blogs, and we'll be at KubeCon. So please stop by the booth and visit us. We'd be happy to give you a demo. If you're not going to be at KubeCon, then you can always go to chronosphere.io, and there's a button right at the top of the page that you can ask to have a demo, and someone will reach out to you to set that up. And with that, we can take any questions. Unless, Eric, do you have any closing comments before we take questions?
No, I just wanted to mention that that 48% is fair enough to say that we're being relatively conservative. I mean, I think a lot of people are going way over that number, but on average, it's around that, which gives everybody kind of a baseline, but it's a nice number to see.
Yeah.
I'm happy to take questions. No problem.
Okay, then we will turn it over to Q&A. So we have some questions coming in. Let's take them from the top. So the first one, can you please describe what the DoorDash system architecture looks like, high-level one, and the high-level version, and why it caused them to generate so much data? Who wants to take this one?
Well, I can do a little bit better than that, better than us trying to describe it. There's two places. Shortly, you're going to be able to probably watch a recorded version of a presentation that's going to discuss this. I believe they're presenting at KubeCon. They're definitely presenting at the Open Observability Day, the pre-event. And they're also presenting with me at PromCon in Europe, in Munich, on November 8th or 9th. I think it's the 8th is my talk with them. There will be some discussion around the architecture, so I'd rather not go into great detail here about it. But why does it cause them to generate so much data? So that is one of the very large, probably the largest food delivery system, and through the pandemic that extremely exploded as far as use and growth and need to track and monitor all the services and various riders and drivers and stuff out there. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Scott, but you can imagine the metrics growth there that exploded out there.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it was driven by, again, they're a very data-driven organization. So they run a lot of experiments. They monitor a lot with tags. They want to understand at the browser level, at the operating system level, they want as much detail as possible. So when you add those tags and dimensions to the data, it creates an explosion of cardinality. And that's what they were running up against, is that, they want to be able to have that very unique insight. And I think, that's DoorDash, that's their level. I think, we hear the term high cardinality, and high cardinality is really dependent on the organization. It's what the organization needs to run the business the way that they want to run the business. Again, if you're a very heavily the data focused engineering org or business, and you want very minute data about very specific things, then you're going to have very high cardinality. And so, the amount of data they're generating and their observability tools was just overwhelming what they were using and giving them problems. And again, because they were also keeping stuff that they had to keep because they couldn't drop it. They can now identify what's being used, what's not being used, and modify and reshape on the fly, and not have to actually have that in the system, pay for that.
Okay, great.
I'm going to. I'm also going to type an answer. I have the name of the talk and the speakers, and it's a Prometheus Day. It's not so it's on Tuesday at the. So I answered one of the question with inside the Q&A tool. With the listing of the thing to look for. And that's the exact same title we're going to use at PromCon, just different speakers.
Great, thanks. And also I want to add one thing. After the webinar, we will send out the follow-up email. They will have our DoDash case study information there. You can also find there. Okay, next questions. How does the Chronosphere platform approach the 3 pillars? And with 3 different products in the platform? I think Erica can take this one.
Yeah, so the 3 pillars is what we touched a little bit upon when I was talking about the phases. So the 3 pillars that they like to talk about is a technology focus, again, as I mentioned, approaching it from you must have metrics, you must have tracing, you must have logs. That's nice, but what that tends to generate is multiple tools and not a lot of integration and a lot of sprawl. You're also talking about technologies, functions, features, and ingesting as much as you can to store without talking about how it's making it possible that as fast as possible what's going on, that you're able to triage and remediate, that you're able to understand deeply with the root cause analysis. So that's kind of where we're going with that. We're not going to deliver individual products. It's a platform that addresses all the issues we're talking about with the phases, but we tend to move on from the initial storyline around pillars. Anything to add to that, Scott?
No, I think you said it well.
Okay, I think Scott can help to answer this one. Do you charge based on data rate or the API cost?
No, we only charge on data you persist. And so it's, yes, we don't charge for anything like that. It's only on what you actually store with us. So, and if you want more questions on that, we could take it offline if someone, and you can reach out to your rep and they can describe, but it's basically that. It's what you store with us.
Okay. Then other question coming in. So this one, I think that both Scott and Eric, you should have come in. So the question is, you mentioned the rate limiting capabilities. Can you explain more about that?
Do you want to take it or do you want me to take it, Eric?
I'll give it to you this time to start with.
Okay. So yeah, so rate limiting, we can actually, within the platform, you can actually limit the amount of data. You can actually, this is kind of a, I guess we're announcing next week, and I'll get a little preview here of something we call quotas. And so you'll be able to set quotas and basically per team, per service, and assign them an amount of data that they can use. And so then if they go over that data, there will be, certain things that will happen. Either the data will, metrics will get dropped, or if it, depending on what the administrator set up for it. But this allows this actually kind of is an interesting concept, because we're actually giving the people that are responsible for these data spikes, aren't actually managing the observability system generally, right? So they're not quote unquote paying for this data. So adding tags is something that is really easy for them. They're like, oh, why not? And so many times, right? And a lot of that data doesn't get used. So now the observability team will be able to say to a group here, this is your amount of data that you can use as you see fit. And now these teams will have to start thinking about what's my really important stuff and what's the stuff I don't care about, and make trade-offs and understand how their data is actually impacting the system, but it also won't crowd others out of the system. So if there's teams that are staying within their limits, then it's not going to affect these other teams, because their data will start to get dropped if the system is at capacity. And it kind of removes that, we have the profile so you can see what teams are using, what amount of data, but it also, with people who aren't using a system that has a profile like that, like ours, a lot of times it's like whack-a-mole, right? You got to go figure out, well, where'd this spike come from? Go find that team, ask them to change, the way that they've instrumented, with the labels and instrumenting of the metrics of their code, and then fix that problem. And then all of a sudden, another team somewhere else does it. And again, sometimes these are unintentional spikes. Someone has a user ID, and you saw, 400, X basically the data there because of the cardinality. And so quotas is something, from a rate limiting perspective, that's really exciting. And we're announcing it next week, and you'll see more and more of that coming in the future.
Well done.
So, Eric, anything you want to add?
I just want to say well done. Scott did a great job.
Okay, then we have the other one. This one is more like the simple question. So is this a SaaS platform, right? So how do you provide that for the customers? Maybe Eric can take this one.
Yeah, sure. I'll take this one. I think they might be asking around what it looks like, right? Tenants, multi-tenants, how it's hosted and what's going on. I think just to give a general overview, it is a SaaS platform. Part of the storyline there is taking the load off of your engineering teams that are becoming more and more involved with having to manage observability tooling and that load. Get them back to doing what they're supposed to be doing by removing that, having to manage the infrastructure for that. The second part is it's all single tenant. So you're not going to be stepped on by other people. There's no risk of stuff like that. That's the way we'd like to deliver it. And also worth mentioning is that it's always run on a cloud that's not where your production environment is. So if you're off running in AWS or something like that, then this will be hosted on Google, for example. What you do not want to have is that a zone or region goes down in your cloud provider's area and you lose your observability also. Then you're flying completely blind. It's not so much a problem to lose your observability for a little bit while your production is still running. Still not an optimal situation, but there's a really good reason for doing that, and that's allowed us to keep the offering that we do of 3 nines. That's our guarantee for uptime on this stuff, and that's because we can't go any higher because the cloud providers that we're hosting on only offer 3 nines. So if we go beyond that, that would be like committing suicide. So taking too much risk, right? It's basically making promises you can't keep. So I hope that answers the question.
Great, thank you. While we are waiting for questions coming in, I'd like to make some announcement. I did mention at the beginning that we were doing a drawing for the 4 Amazon gift cards. So I will go ahead and quickly announce the winners. Our first winner is Chloe C. Second winner is Dan S. And third winner is Heather M. And the fourth and the final winner is Matt B. So congratulations to all our winners. We will be reaching out to you with an email with instructions for claiming your gift card. So please keep an eye on your inbox. If you don't find the email, please check your spam folder. All right, Eric and Scott, I didn't see any new questions coming in, so I think we are going to wrap up the Q&A at this point. Okay, so we still have some time. Any parting words or anything you'd like to share the audience to know before we close out?
Nothing from my side, Scott.
No, well, thank you. Just thank you for attending. As I said, this feature is really unique, and it's something that is, for me, is really exciting. That's why I was excited to do this webinar, because I think if for more people to see this and be exposed to it, because it's very different than what most people are used to from a monitoring solution, the capabilities. And so I encourage you to reach out to us. Like I said, meet us at KubeCon if you're going to be there. We're having a lot. We've Eric wrote a great blog. If you go to our website, reviewing everything that we're going to be participating in there, including our offsite event at Barcade. But if you can't make it there, again, reach out to us. We'd be happy to discuss this in more detail, provide you with a demo, and discuss your needs around your observability.
All right. Then thank you everyone for being here with us for today's session. I'd like to remind everyone that the session was recorded. So following this webinar, you will receive the email with a link to access the recording on demand. You can also visit the Chronosphere website, events and webinars to find this recording and more upcoming webinars or the on-demand sessions. We do hope to see you again at any upcoming webinars or events. Everyone have a great rest of your day.